A young, underappreciated office worker is humiliated and betrayed when his boss steals his groundbreaking idea and takes all the credit, earning a promotion while leaving him in the shadows. But instead of giving up, he decides to fight back in silence. Over the course of 2 years, he builds a small marketing empire from the ground up, stealing his former company's biggest clients and dismantling its reputation piece by piece. As his success grows, he finally confronts the arrogant boss who once belittled him, but the tables turn when his rival strikes back with a vicious public scandal that threatens to destroy everything he's built. Armed with secrets and evidence, he must make a bold move to not only save his career but take down the man who tried to ruin him. This is a gripping tale of betrayal, revenge, and triumph where the underdog becomes the ultimate victor. I sat at my tiny desk in the corner of the bustling open office, staring at the flickering screen of an ancient computer that belonged in a museum, not a prestigious marketing firm. The monitor's hum blended with the chatter and laughter of my coworkers, all of whom seemed completely unaware, or more likely, uninterested, that I was drowning. The job was supposed to be a foot in the door to my dream career, but instead, it felt like I'd been chained to the bottom rung of a ladder I wasn't even allowed to climb. "Hey, coffee boy." Greg's booming voice cut through the noise, making me flinch. I turned to see him leaning against his desk, a smirk plastered on his face. He waved an empty coffee cup in the air like a king summoning a servant. "Extra cream. Don't mess it up this time." A few chuckles rippled through the office. I forced a smile, nodding as I grabbed the cup. My face burned, but I knew better than to say anything. Greg wasn't just my boss, he was the office alpha, the guy everyone sucked up to. He had that natural charisma that made people overlook the cruelty beneath his charm. Speaking out against him would have been like challenging a lion in its own den. I shuffled toward the break room, keeping my head down. As I filled the cup with coffee, my hands trembled. I hated how much power he had over me, how he could reduce me to nothing with just a few words. But what choice did I have? I was broke, buried in student loans, and living in a crumbling studio apartment I could barely afford. This job, humiliating as it was, kept the lights on. The break room door swung open, and one of my coworkers, Sarah, walked in. She was one of the few people who treated me like a human being. She gave me a sympathetic smile when she saw the coffee cup in my hand. "Greg again?" she asked. "Who else?" I muttered, trying to laugh it off. But the bitterness in my voice was unmistakable. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "You know, you don't have to put up with this. You're smart, way smarter than him. You could do so much better." Her words stung, not because they weren't true, but because they reminded me of how far I'd fallen short of my own expectations. I shrugged, forcing another smile. "Maybe someday." Sarah didn't press the issue, and I was grateful. I wasn't ready to admit, even to myself, how trapped I felt. I returned to Greg's desk, placed the coffee in front of him, and quietly returned to my corner, trying to make myself invisible. But the universe wasn't done humiliating me that day. Later that afternoon, the company held a meeting in the main conference room. All employees were required to attend, which meant I got to sit at the back, hoping no one would notice me. The CEO, a polished man in an expensive suit, stood at the head of the table, outlining the firm's plans for a new campaign. He emphasized the need for innovation, for bold ideas that would set us apart from the competition. When he opened the floor for suggestions, a tense silence fell over the room. No one wanted to risk pitching something that might be shot down, not with Greg and the other senior managers watching. My heart pounded as I stared at the notepad in front of me. For weeks, I'd been working on an idea in secret, an approach that used social media analytics to target audiences more effectively. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was fresh, and I believed it could work. I glanced around the room. No one was speaking. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry, but I forced myself to raise my hand. I have an idea," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Every head turned to look at me. My stomach churned as I saw the disbelief on their faces. Greg, seated near the CEO, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "This should be good," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few people chuckled, and my confidence wavered. But I had already started, and I wasn't going to back down now. I took a deep breath and continued. "It's about using social media analytics to create targeted campaigns," I said. "We can track engagement metrics in real time to see what resonates with audiences and adjust our strategy on the fly. It's cost-effective and—" Greg raised a hand, cutting me off. "Okay, that's enough," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Look, kid, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is way above your pay grade. Stick to what you're good at, yeah." The room erupted in laughter. My cheeks burned as I sank back into my seat, wishing I could disappear. The CEO didn't even acknowledge me. He simply moved on, asking for other suggestions. I sat there, numb, as the meeting continued. But the worst was yet to come. A week later, Greg called another meeting. This time, he strutted into the room like a peacock, a PowerPoint presentation loaded onto the projector. As he spoke, my stomach dropped. He was presenting my idea. Word for word, detail for detail, it was mine. The same concept I'd pitched, the same strategies I'd outlined, but now it was his. And the leadership team loved it. "This is exactly what we need," the CEO said, nodding in approval. "Brilliant work, Greg. Brilliant." That's what they called him. Meanwhile, I sat in the back, invisible as always. Greg got a promotion for his brilliance. I got nothing. That night, as I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, something inside me snapped. I'd spent my whole life playing by the rules, believing that hard work and talent would be enough to get ahead. But this? This was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed. If the system was rigged, I wouldn't play by its rules anymore. If they wanted to treat me like a nobody, I'd find a way to make them regret it. And I wouldn't just get even, I'd get ahead. Quietly, methodically, I began to plan. I quit my job 2 months later, but not in the fiery, dramatic way I had envisioned during my sleepless nights. There was no shouting, no flipping tables, no mic-dropping moments. Just a polite email to HR, a fake smile, and a handshake with my manager on my way out the door. They didn't care that I was leaving. I was just another disposable cog in their machine. But that was fine with me. I didn't need their recognition, not yet. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment since the day Greg stole my idea. While everyone thought I was quietly fading into the background, I was watching, learning, and documenting everything. Greg might have taken my idea, but I'd taken something far more valuable from him: knowledge. Knowledge of the clients, the contracts, the inner workings of the company, and, most importantly, all the cracks in its foundation. With no job and just enough savings to survive for a few months, I threw myself into building something of my own. I started a tiny marketing consultancy from my dingy apartment. My resources were pitiful, just an old laptop and a cheap desk shoved into the corner of my living room. But I had something that Greg and his cronies underestimated: hunger. I began reaching out to small businesses, companies that were ignored by firms like my old employer. They didn't have the massive budgets the big players demanded, but they had one thing in common: desperation. Desperation to grow, to stay afloat, to find someone who actually cared about their success. I pitched myself as that person. The first couple of months were brutal. Rejections piled up faster than I could handle. Some companies didn't even bother responding. Others laughed me off, saying they couldn't risk hiring a nobody with no track record. It stung, but every no only hardened my resolve. Every failure taught me what not to do. I adjusted my pitches, refined my strategies, and kept knocking on doors until one finally opened. It was a small bakery chain, 5 locations, struggling to compete with larger franchises in the area. Their sales had been declining for years, and they were on the verge of closing shop. When the owner, Mrs. Patel, reluctantly agreed to meet with me, I could tell she wasn't expecting much. I sat across from her in her cramped office, pitching my ideas with every ounce of passion I had. Big firms want you to believe marketing is this huge, complicated machine, I told her, showing her the research I'd done on her business. But it's really about connection. We can focus on your local community, highlight the quality of your ingredients, and use social media to tell your story. You don't need a massive budget, just the right strategy. She leaned back in her chair, studying me for a long moment. You really believe you can do this? She asked. I know I can, I said, my voice steady. That was the first yes. The one that changed everything. With Mrs. Patel's trust, I threw myself into the work. I created social media campaigns that showcased her bakers at work, sharing behind-the-scenes moments that made her business feel personal. I organized small events at her stores, free workshops, tastings, anything to get people through the door. And it worked. Within 3 months, her sales increased by 40%. Her customers weren't just buying bread, they were buying into her story. Word spread. Mrs. Patel recommended me to her suppliers, her business contacts, anyone who would listen. One by one, more clients started coming in. Most were small businesses like hers, but that was fine by me. Every project was another opportunity to prove myself, to build my reputation from the ground up. As my client list grew, so did my confidence. I upgraded my equipment, hired a part-time assistant, and started thinking bigger. By the end of the first year, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But I never forgot why I had started this journey in the first place. This wasn't just about building a business. It was about revenge. And then, the opportunity I'd been waiting for landed in my lap. It was a late Tuesday night when I received an email from a potential client. The subject line read, "Urgent marketing consultation needed." I opened it, skimming the details. The company was a mid-sized tech firm that had been struggling to recover from a disastrous product launch. Their previous marketing firm had failed to deliver results, and they were looking for someone to turn things around quickly. It wasn't until I read the name of the firm that my heart skipped a beat. They were one of the largest clients my old company had ever signed. I remembered Greg bragging about landing their account, how he treated it like a badge of honor. And now, they were coming to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had no idea who I was, just a small-time marketer with a growing reputation. But that was perfect. I didn't want them to know, not yet. Our first meeting was over Zoom. The CEO of the tech firm, a sharp-eyed man named Andrew, outlined their challenges while I listened intently. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I presented a plan that was bold, innovative, and exactly what they needed. By the time I finished, Andrew was nodding, a faint smile on his lips. "This is exactly the kind of approach we've been looking for," he said. "When can you start?" We signed the contract that week. The deal was worth more than I had made in my first year of freelancing combined. But the money wasn't the real prize. The real prize was knowing that I had just stolen one of my old company's biggest clients. As I worked on the campaign, I couldn't help but think about Greg. I wondered if he even realized what was happening, if he understood that the account he had once boasted about was slipping through his fingers. Probably not. Greg had always been too arrogant to notice the ground crumbling beneath him. But this was just the beginning. My success with the tech firm would set off a chain reaction I hadn't dared to dream of. Within months, more of my old company's clients would come knocking on my door, each one eager for the kind of results I was delivering. And as their empire began to crumble, I would be there, quietly watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For now, though, I kept my head down and focused on the work. Revenge wasn't something you rushed. It was something you savored. The cracks in my old company's foundation began to show faster than I expected. By the time I finished my first campaign for the tech firm, the results were undeniable. Their engagement metrics skyrocketed, their customer base expanded, and their revenues stabilized after months of decline. Andrew was thrilled. He sent me glowing referrals to his business network, and within weeks, I had 3 new clients, all of them former accounts of my old company. Word travels fast in the marketing world, especially when someone is outperforming the big players. It wasn't long before people in the industry started noticing me. At first, it was subtle, an extra LinkedIn connection request here, an email from a curious business owner there. But soon, I was getting calls from executives who'd never bothered to acknowledge me back when I was the coffee boy. They didn't recognize my name, of course. Why would they? I'd been invisible to them back then. But now, I was a rising star. The irony was delicious, but I kept my head down. I didn't want anyone at my old company connecting the dots just yet. Greg and his team were still riding the remnants of their reputation, oblivious to how much they'd already lost. That was fine by me. I wasn't just trying to beat them, I wanted to dismantle everything they'd built, brick by brick. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Wednesday morning, and I was at my new office, a modest but professional space I'd rented now that my business had grown beyond my apartment. My assistant, Emily, poked her head into my office with a cautious look on her face. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." I frowned. Did he say who he was? She hesitated. "His name is Paul Jacobs. He says he used to work with you." My stomach dropped. Paul had been one of the few decent people at my old company, a junior account manager who, like me, had been overlooked and undervalued. We'd never been close, but we'd shared enough whispered frustrations about Greg and the toxic culture to form a quiet camaraderie. "Send him in," I said, my voice steady. Paul walked in a moment later, looking haggard and worn. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He glanced around the office, taking in the sleek furniture and the awards I'd started collecting. "Nice place," he said, his tone half admiring, half exhausted. "Thanks," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "What brings you here, Paul?" He sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble," he began. I need help. Things are bad over there. Really bad." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "Over where?" "You know where," he said with a bitter laugh. "The company. Greg's losing it. He's under so much pressure he's snapping at everyone. Half the team has quit in the last 6 months, and the clients," he paused, shaking his head. "The clients are dropping like flies. People are saying it's because of you." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Me?" Paul nodded. "Yeah. Your name's been coming up a lot lately." "Well, not your name, exactly. They just call you that guy or the freelancer. No one over there's figured out it's you yet, but they know someone's out there stealing their clients and doing a better job than they ever could." I didn't say anything, letting his words hang in the air. Inside, my heart was pounding. This was the moment I'd been working toward, the validation that my efforts were finally paying off. But I wasn't about to show my hand, not yet. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice calm. Paul sighed, leaning forward. "Because I'm done with them. Greg's a nightmare, the company's falling apart, and I can't take it anymore. I've been watching what you've been doing, and, well, I was hoping maybe you'd have a place for me here." It took everything I had not to smile. Paul wasn't just any employee. He was a goldmine of insider knowledge, someone who could tell me exactly how bad things had gotten at my old company. More importantly, his defection would be a signal to others: proof that my business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. I'd have to think about it, I said carefully. I don't make hiring decisions lightly. Paul nodded quickly. Of course. I get it. But just so you know, I'm not the only one. There are others over there who'd jump ship in a heartbeat if they thought you'd take them. I let that sink in before giving him a measured nod. I'll consider it. In the meantime, if there's anything you want to share about what's happening over there, I'm all ears. Paul didn't need much encouragement. Over the next hour, he spilled everything: how Greg had been scrambling to hold on to clients, how the leadership team was in disarray, and how rumors of unethical practices were starting to surface. It was worse than I'd imagined. My old company wasn't just struggling, it was on the verge of collapse. After Paul left, I sat at my desk, staring at the stack of files in front of me. The plan I'd been carefully crafting for the past 2 years was finally coming together. I'd taken their clients, their reputation, and now their employees. But there was still one piece missing: Greg himself. I needed to hit him where it hurt, to show him that I wasn't just some nobody he could step on. I wanted him to look me in the eye and realize exactly who had orchestrated his downfall. But for that, I needed the right opportunity. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. A month later, I received an invitation to a high-profile marketing conference in the city. It was the kind of event where industry leaders gathered to network, showcase their successes, and quietly size up the competition. My business was still small compared to the giants, but my recent success with high-profile clients had earned me a spot on a panel discussion. It was the perfect chance to make my presence known. When I walked into the conference hall, the first person I saw was Greg. He was standing near the registration desk, talking loudly to a group of colleagues. His suit was sharp, his smile confident, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. He looked overworked, stressed, and, if I wasn't imagining it, a little desperate. He didn't notice me at first. Why would he? To him, I was still invisible, a nobody. But that was about to change. As I checked in and made my way to the panel room, I could feel the weight of the moment settling over me. This was it. The chance to confront the man who had humiliated me, stolen from me, and dismissed me as worthless. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the coffee boy or the invisible employee in the corner. I was his competition. And I was about to take the spotlight. The conference room was buzzing with energy as industry professionals filed in, taking their seats in front of the stage. The panel discussion was titled "The Future of Marketing: Innovation in a Crowded Landscape," and I had been invited as a last-minute addition due to the buzz surrounding my work. My seat was on the far end of the stage, next to executives from big-name firms, each of them far more established than me. But none of that mattered. I had earned my place here, and today was the day everything changed. As I adjusted my microphone, I caught a glimpse of Greg in the audience. He was seated near the back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He hadn't approached me before the panel started, and I wondered if he even realized who I was yet. I decided to let him figure it out in real time. The moderator began with introductions, giving each panelist a chance to highlight their recent accomplishments. When it was my turn, I leaned forward, speaking with the quiet confidence I had honed over the past 2 years. I started my company to help businesses that have been overlooked by larger firms, I said. In the past year, we've doubled revenue for our clients by focusing on personalized, data-driven strategies. My goal has always been to prove that creativity and results don't require bloated budgets or bureaucracy. The moderator nodded approvingly, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on Greg, whose posture had shifted slightly. His brows furrowed as he stared at me, a flicker of recognition passing over his face. For the first time, I saw something in him I'd never seen before: uncertainty. The discussion continued, with each panelist sharing their insights and debating the future of the industry. I chimed in strategically, making sure my points were sharp and memorable without dominating the conversation. The audience responded well, and I could feel the momentum building. But the real fireworks began during the Q&A session. A hand shot up in the audience, and to my surprise, it was Greg's. The moderator called on him, and he stood, clearing his throat. "Gregory Hale," he said, introducing himself as if no one in the room already knew him. "Senior Vice President at Apex Marketing." Apex. That was my old company's name, though I noticed he'd conveniently left out the fact that they were bleeding clients. "I have a question for Mr." He paused, glancing at the name placard in front of me. "Mr. Lewis, correct?" "That's right," I said evenly, hiding the thrill of hearing him say my name. He still didn't seem to remember where he knew me from, but that was about to change. "I'm curious," Greg continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "what do you think separates your boutique agency from larger, more established firms with decades of experience?" I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to undermine me in front of the audience, to remind everyone that I was the smallest fish in the room. But I was ready. "Well, Gregory," I began, emphasizing his name just enough to make his smirk falter, "I think what separates us is our ability to adapt. Larger firms tend to rely on their reputations and existing client bases, but that can make them complacent. They lose sight of what really matters, delivering results." The audience murmured in approval, and I pressed on. "In fact, we've had several clients come to us recently after leaving larger firms. They were looking for something different, something better. And we've been happy to provide it." Greg's smirk vanished completely. His jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels in his head turning. He was starting to piece it together, starting to realize who I was and what I had done. But I wasn't finished. I leaned forward slightly, letting my voice drop just enough to make the moment feel personal. "One of the things I've learned is that it's not just about winning clients, it's about keeping them. And that only happens when you treat them with respect and deliver on your promises. Something I think certain firms in this industry have forgotten." The room fell silent for a beat, and I saw Greg's face flush red. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but the moderator cut in, thanking him for his question and moving on. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. I had just taken my shot, and it had landed perfectly. After the panel ended, people began approaching me, executives, potential clients, even journalists who wanted to feature me in their industry publications. But my focus was on Greg, who stood near the back of the room, glaring at me. For the first time, he didn't look like the untouchable, arrogant man who had humiliated me. He looked cornered. I decided it was time to end this once and for all. I walked up to him, extending a hand. "Greg," I said, smiling. "It's been a while." He didn't take my hand. Instead, he narrowed his eyes. "It's you," he said, his voice low. "I knew you looked familiar. You're the coffee boy." "Not anymore," I replied, my smile widening. "But I'm glad you remember. It makes this moment so much sweeter." Greg's face darkened, and he took a step closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You think you've won, don't you? Just because you stole a few clients? You're nothing, Lewis. You'll never be anything." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You still don't get it, do you? This was never just about the clients. It was about exposing you for who you really are, a fraud. And trust me, Greg, the rest of the industry is starting to notice." I turned to walk away, but he grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you're untouchable, but you're not. Everyone has skeletons in their closet." I pulled my arm free, giving him a hard look. "Maybe. But at least I didn't build my career by stealing from the people beneath me." I walked away, leaving him standing there, seething. But as I exited the room, I couldn't shake the unease his words left behind. Everyone has skeletons in their closet. 2 weeks later, I found out what he meant. I was in the middle of a meeting with a new client when Emily burst into my office, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. It was an article from an industry blog. The headline read, "Rising Marketing Star Accused of Plagiarism and Unethical Practices." My stomach dropped as I skimmed the article. It claimed I had stolen my ideas from former colleagues, using them to poach clients and build my business. The sources were anonymous, but the language was damning. It didn't take long to figure out who was behind it. Greg. Over the next few days, the allegations spread like wildfire. Clients called, worried about the rumors. Some canceled their contracts outright. My inbox was flooded with messages from journalists asking for comments, and my competitors seized the opportunity to cast doubt on my reputation. Everything I had worked so hard to build was unraveling before my eyes. But Greg had underestimated me again. I had anticipated that he might try something like this, and I was ready. I called a press conference, inviting the same journalists who had been hounding me for answers. When the cameras started rolling, I stood at the podium, holding a folder of documents I had been saving for just this moment. "For those of you questioning my integrity," I began, "let me be clear, these allegations are false, and I have the proof to back it up." I opened the folder, revealing a collection of emails, contracts, and other documents that not only disproved the claims against me but exposed Greg's history of unethical practices. I had been documenting everything since the day I left his company, and now, I used it to bury him. The fallout was swift. Greg was fired within a week, his reputation in shambles. His company filed for bankruptcy shortly after, unable to recover from the loss of clients and the scandal I had exposed. As for me, the ordeal only strengthened my resolve. I rebuilt my business from the ashes, and this time, there was no one left to stand in my way. Revenge isn't just about winning. It's about surviving, outlasting your enemies, and emerging stronger than ever. And that's exactly what I did.